Time to break it down.
Put the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
Down, put the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. And this week we have a really great guest on with us. This guy is definitely got his finger on the pulse of things going on in the NBA. He is a former NBA player, also former president of basketball operations for the Charlotte Hornets. The great Rod Higgins is on with us to help us talk about what's going to be happening in the next few weeks, getting his perspective. Rod, thank you for joining us this week on the Baseline.
No problem, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Rod, man, the first thing that I want to get your take on, you are a former NBA player. You've seen it as a player, and now you've also seen it from the front office end as well, too, through your experience. One of the interesting things is there was a time in the NBA when the draft was so relevant and so important. But now, because of the deals being made, collective bargaining agreement, and now the new TV deal, it still feels like there is this priority or this importance about acquiring the players through free agency. I was just curious from your perspective, do you think that we will get to a point where the emphasis and the importance should be back on the talent, the up and coming talent coming out through the draft, more so than it is just about the guys that are coming out in free agency?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. You can look at success in terms of the history of our league and the NBA as a whole. And, I think preferably would like for it to be through the draft, because I think what happens that way is you're able to draft a player, retain a player, develop a player. And, he's kind of your guy. And, a la Steph Curry, for instance, in Golden State. And I think what happens a lot of times in free agency, you have to get lucky. You have to be able to have the cap space, get a plan together. There are plans sometimes that work if you get one guy, but there are plans that might not be as successful. But then you see a Miami who can get three superstars in free agency together at one time. That's probably more of an aberration as in terms of the way the league works. The problem sometimes with the draft, you want to draft and you want to be able to get that superstar. So, you kind of look at the numbers and you say the superstars come probably in the lottery, top five. You can argue, a lot of players, but then you have instances where guys just kind of pan out like a Paul George who was drafted at number 10. So, I mean, teams want to draft their guy, but it's one of those things that the player now wants to be drafted in the lottery. If he's a top 5 pick, you want to have him develop into a special player, a la Kevin Durant. So, I mean, there's so many variables. There's a lot of luck involved as well.
So when you talk about that, I want to kind of get into the actual nuts and bolts of the process, if you will. When you're getting your information together on a player for the NBA draft, how many sources of info do you typically gather? I know a lot of guys, like, they talk to high school coaches, they talk to the kid's parents, they obviously talk to the kid himself, they talk to the agent, et cetera, et cetera. How many sources of information do you gather, on a player, and what is an absolute must-have of piece of information that you need?
Well, I don't think you can put a number on it. I think you can obviously look at the history of the league and in terms of intel reports and grassroots situations with AAU. The league as a whole, you key mark players real early in the game, and you're unlimited in trying to get information on that player. So it might be a high school coach, it might be a best friend of a high school player, it might be the college roommate. I mean, you just go back as far as you can and get as much information as you seem vital. And I think some teams do it some ways, other teams do it another way. So I don't think there's a number you can put on that. You just get as much as you can probably stand and make that decision based upon what your criteria are. And there was a second part of the question you also asked.
Yeah, what is that absolute must-have? Like, what is something that you obviously need the statistics and things like that, but what do you cannot move forward on a player without having this source of information?
Well, you want to know about the personal habits of the player. You kind of know what he does on the floor, on his stats and the way he plays, and you want to know the type of person he is. You want to know where he how he was built in terms of his community. You want to know if he's a hard worker, if he's coachable, if he's one of those guys that can fit in well in your locker room. All of that stuff is vital in determining who you want in your culture on your team. And like I said earlier, there's so much information that's out there, and the more the better for your decision-making process.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, with our special guest, Rod Higgins, former president of basketball operations for the Charlotte Hornets. Rod, one of the things that I thought was very interesting is where we're trending. Earlier this year, there's been some changes that the NBA has made with regards to the NBA Combine. And then we saw that a few of the marquee players, quote-unquote lottery players, did not participate in this combine. And I was just curious to know, how important is it for your staff to go out there, your scouts to go out there to see these guys participate in the combine, or is it more relegated to the private practices, the private workout sessions that you have for some of the guys that you're really eyeing in the draft? From your perspective, where do you lean on more when it comes to those type of things?
Well, the combine is very important. It's just another avenue for you to gain information. You see the kids up close and personal. You see them drilling. You see them being measured out. You see them interacting. You see maybe not the lottery picks on the court, but you've scouted those guys for, quite a few years. So you got a feel for them already on the court. The combine also allows you to interview the player. And I've always found in the past that, the last few years, guys weren't even, first-round picks weren't even competing out there. At least they had some first-round picks this year competing. And now you can get a chance to really get into that guy's head in terms of an interview. You can ask him tough questions. You can ask him stuff about himself. I've always found that to be a vital part. And I think, it's been good that now some of the players are starting to compete a little bit more at the 5-on-5 level at the combine. It's interesting for the lottery picks. They have a long career, and I understand that, they probably don't want to risk injury, and it's all part of the process. But I think the combine in itself is a measure of the decision-making process, but it's not the whole part, because your scouting staff has been out there the whole year, has had an opportunity to, be on campus and see what a player can do on the court. So it's just another base of information that you can use to, like I said, when draft night comes, you're ready.
So kind of second part to that question that you just answered is, how much does it put you off, per se, as a general manager or as a talent evaluator? Well, because you see guys skip the combine, but you're seeing a lot of guys now even skip workouts with teams in the lottery. Like, Towns is not working out for the Lakers. Moutier doesn't want to work out for the Kings. Russell skipped his workout with the 76ers. You've gathered enough information, perhaps, throughout the year, with your scouts and those things, kind of looking at the player. But does it put you off in a certain way as a general manager to kind of say, well, damn, now he doesn't even want to come work out for our team? And would that make you pass on a guy, perhaps?
I think a lot of that depends on your overall philosophy as an organization. You've seen it both ways, where, if you don't bring a guy in for a workout, maybe you don't draft them, or vice versa. I think for a team, they just want to get the best player for their particular needs and their talent base and what they want to improve upon their roster with. I don't think the workout is sometimes overstated, in my opinion, because, like I stated earlier, you've seen these guys umpteen amount of times, and you kind of know who they are as people and as players. The workouts, a lot of times, kind of like the combine in Chicago, is controlled by the agent. So the agent is going to tell a player, I think you should do this and maybe not that. And so with the workout, I think sometimes those are agent driven, because maybe you don't want your player going to a team that already has his position carried or loaded, and he might not get the minutes in his rookie year. So the agents sometimes play with the workouts, and they'll try to dictate it and use their influence that way too. So that's part of the issue as well.
Rod Higgins joining us here on The Baseline, our segment of The Breakdown. Rod, one of the interesting things that I've seen already this year has been the talk about the bigs. Jahlil Okafor, Karl Anthony Towns. But, over the last couple of seasons, I felt that the way that the NBA is going is via the two-way player, the guy that has the versatility to probably play that 2-3, maybe even that 4 position. Guys like Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and now we're seeing the emergence of Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and what they're able to do. Does it surprise you that we're still talking about how essential the 5-man is when we're talking about the NBA draft, the future players of the NBA, and maybe not guys like Justice Winslow, who clearly has the capabilities of playing at that capacity of the guys that we just mentioned a moment ago?
Well, I mean, you bring up a very valid point and some observations as well. You can make an argument that, the league has kind of changed that way. I mean, some of the last centers to dominate, I guess there was Shaq. Obviously, you can say Tim was a center, and when he was younger. Hakeem, you got to tell me out of some of the centers that dominated Kareem and won championships. And now you kind of fast forward. I mean, you think about, and let me go back to another team, the Celtics, when they had Bird, McHale, and Parrish. They dominated with big guys. And so, the league is now kind of transcended into, I don't want to say perimeter oriented, but I think space and dribble drives and creating shots and creating pace and getting more attempts and the 3-pointers. So the game has definitely changed that way. Now, it depends on what you think is important as a front office, as a coaching staff. How can you win? Like, now that the Golden State Warriors are the champions, and, you see it all the time in the past where teams try to emulate or try to, kind of copy the style of play of the champion. So would that be something that teams would do? But it's just a great question to ask yourself. But it's just so hard to pass up on a 7-footer who's skilled, who can rebound, who's going to be able to dominate the paint, maybe like a Shaq or a Tim Duncan. So it's an interesting dilemma on your philosophies. I think this trend has been started a while ago. I mean, the great Bulls players, with Jordan and Pippen, they kind of created that space. They didn't really have a big guy. They had big guys that were more defensive oriented and things of that nature. But now the game has changed a little bit. But for me, I'm kind of a traditional guy that way. If I can find a big can be the next Tim Duncan, I would probably take a choice on him.
So, kind of along the same lines of that same question too, is, you personally, when you were in the position and being the talent evaluator and ultimately the decision maker, what's your take on the talent versus need debate? Is it always you just take the best talent available, or do you take the best talent that can fit your need?
I think it depends a lot on where you're drafting, and just not to evade your question, but if I'm drafting in the top 5, I'm probably wanting to get the best talent available. If I'm drafting 24 to 30, I might look for a need. So it just depends on where you are in the first round or where you're drafting. It's hard to pass up on the talent if you have, got a top 5 pick. So in essence, you probably had a poor season the year before. You want to kind of jumpstart your franchise in a certain way, if that makes sense.
Rod Higgins joining us here, and we're discussing the future. We're talking about that NBA draft time, and teams are making their play. They're setting up their chess pieces. Rod, talk a little bit about some of these war stories that you've had, man. What is it what's the feel like when you're sitting in that room and you're evaluating, you're looking up and down at that talent, and you're saying, this is who I want, this is who we need, and then somewhere in the near distance, there's maybe a little Michael Jordan plug-in or somebody else plug-in, a head coach's plug-in. I mean, how intense does it get when you guys are sitting in there making your evaluations about who exactly it is that you want to see on that roster, on that team to help push your team forward?
Well, it can get very intense only because it's such an important time for improving your team.
Because you sound like such a mellow guy right now.
No,
That's what I'm saying.
It can be.
There has to be a Jekyll and Hyde thing going.
It gets really intense in there. I mean, you're trying to improve your team, so you're going to have an opinion. I'm going to have an opinion. They might not always come together, but that's the beautiful thing about having a big staff and guys that know what they're doing and have scouted these players, of course it's intense. But ultimately, it's kind of like a team in terms of putting egos aside and putting maybe what you want in the forefront. It's all about the team and getting it right. And then it's all about the draft room and everybody's kind of having their input. And one thing I always wanted when I was there was to, have everybody talk about what you like and what you don't like. And debate is beautiful. As long as I'm respecting your opinion, you're respecting mine, we can probably hash something out and get something done. But it's very intense, believe me.
So let's follow up on that. What's kind of been, if you can recall, the most agonizing draft for you, where maybe you had a high pick and teams were calling you up to the minute trying to get that pick, and you're trying to figure out whether you're going to keep it or not? Or what kind of take us back into that? What year or what draft was the most agonizing for you personally?
Well, I can put a finger on it right now. There was a year when I want to say, I know Larry Brown was our coach, and we did not have a pick. So we were basically trying to purchase one in the second round, and we hit our first was gone. So when you don't have picks in the draft, and it's really hard to trade at that point as well, because the picks are going to be asset value, even if you don't want to pick the player in the draft or the position or that number in the draft. When you don't have the ability to have that power, that chip in your hand, that's definitely the most frustrating, is when you don't have any picks in the draft and you're trying to get better. I mean, if you don't have picks in the draft and maybe you have, the world champions and you got 12 players under contract going into next year's season, those kind of situations might make it more easy to deal with. But when you're trying to improve, trying to get to that next level, and you don't have a pick, that can be just so frustrating. Obviously, it can be devastating to the improvement as well.
Rod Higgins joining us here on the Baseline, our segment of the breakdown. Rod, I just want to get your personal opinion when you talk about the guys that are going to be available in this upcoming draft. When you look at the players that are available for selection, who do you think really stands the chance or the opportunity to really to set themselves apart immediately once they come into the NBA? Will it be a Karl Anthony Towns, a Jahlil Okafor, an Emmanuel Mudiay, or maybe one of the international players? Just kind of from the feel and from the things that you've kind of heard through the grapevine, who do you really feel like, whichever team drafts him, maybe it doesn't matter what team that drafts him, this guy is going to have that kind of breakout year like we talked about last year with Andrew Wiggins? Yeah,
I think when you're drafting a player, obviously the team's going to want to say, my guy. Me as a basketball guy, I hope all of these young men have great standout careers and they're able to stay injury free and they realize their talent, and more importantly, they get with a good team and a team that can develop them. So saying all of that, have an opportunity to see some of the kids. I think that, obviously you see Okafor and Towns, probably the top two players being picked from what I read and what I hear. And, the point guards with Russell and Mudiay. I had an opportunity to see Kaminsky during the Big Ten tournament. I think he's a heck of a player. He's going to have to, I think, get with a good situation to kind of develop him in terms of what he's going to be as a pro. Like Okafor and Towns and Russell, they seem to have positions. Stanley Johnson seems to be a small forward. Kaminsky is a guy who, once he finds his position, he has a chance to be a really fantastic player. I've seen Booker, great shooter. One player I'm really intrigued with is being in Las Vegas last week, watching Kristaps Porzingis.
Oh, yeah.
I knew a little bit about him in terms of reading about him, and then went to the workout and watched him work out and really shoot the ball so well I think he's 7'1". He has a really great stroke from the three range. He can shoot it mid-range. He can run the floor very well. So I think that guy is a bit of maybe I don't want to say an unknown, but a guy that could be really a surprise player in next year during the course of the season.
You know, I had a chance actually to interview Kristaps, and he's actually a really talented and speaks English perfectly, and just a very, very good guy. He seems to have a good handle on it. So that kind of leads me into my next question too. I mean, he's from Latvia. You know, I mean, the only other person that came from there was Andres Biedrins, if you will. I mean, Kristaps even told me that himself. So from your perspective and, you know, dealing with different scouts from around the league, we know, Spain and some of those other places are rich in talent. But where's a hotbed of talent that you think, you know, that's untapped in the NBA in terms of talent right now, where somebody else may be coming out of in the future?
Oh, man, that's a question I probably don't know as well as I might in a couple of months from now. I think, you know, basketball being a global sport and these players are so talented, you know, like Kristaps coming out of Latvia, last player, like you said, Andres. Remember us drafting him in Golden State, a hardworking guy, had great hands, didn't shoot it like Kristaps, but, you know, you can look around the world and see, you know, players coming from all over the place. But in terms of hotbeds coming up, I think only time will tell with that one.
Rod, final question here from, you know, and I'm just really curious to get your take on this one. You know, the Charlotte Hornets, they had a really down season last season. And, you know, it feels like everybody pointed the finger at Lance Stevenson. Lance Stevenson gets sent to the Los Angeles Clippers. And I have to ask, since you were a man in position out there in Charlotte, given the fact that Lance did come over from Indiana, doing what he did and what was expected of him to play for the Charlotte Hornets, would Lance Stevenson had been a Rod Higgins kind of guy? I wanted to get your take from that, because the mystery of Lance Stevenson, I think now is going to turn a new page. But I was always curious from a management perspective, would he have been, you know, the kind of guy that you would have loved to have on that roster if the opportunity presented itself? Would he have been a Rod Higgins kind of guy?
Wow, you put me in an interesting position on that question. I think, you know, it's unfair to, you know, maybe to have an opinion one way or another. I think, you know, Lance, when he got, so it was last summer when right before in the playoffs, he really became a quality player, and he's probably still a quality player. He's only 24 years old, and he, you know, he still has an upside aspect to his game, possibly. You know, the not knowing him as a guy, I've never met Lance, so I couldn't say that truthfully and honestly. You know, the stuff on the court in terms of wins and losses, that's what you see. And, you know, fitting in with, you know, what the staff and what the team is trying to do, that's what you see from afar. So, you know, that's probably, you know, that's probably a tough one. I wouldn't say one thing one way or another, because I don't know Lance that way. So I'm sorry.
It's all good, Rod. we weren't trying to have you put him on, but I think what was so interesting is the fact that everybody, you know, just feels like he's like a farce. And me personally, yeah, you know, he can be somewhat of a head case at times, but he still brings versatility on the court. Really, some of the attributes that we were just talking about earlier with the two-way advantages. I mean, he does play some really good defense. He could be a pest against whoever he matches up against offensively. And, you know, he can also create, and he can also shoot. You know, when he shoots a decent percentage, he can rebound the basketball. I mean, you know, the guy can offer something to a team, which is why it surprised me that, you know, the Hornets had him for 1 year and then were already ready to let him go. You know, just after that first year, despite a season, you know, which I couldn't think clearly across the board, the team just really didn't play well, given the height of everything that happened with this season and the fact that the Hawks really played great basketball during the regular season.
I will add this to Lance. I think that he is probably going to have to really, you know, do some soul searching and, you know, why it didn't happen, and figure out what he can do this summer to get better. You know, having an opportunity to see him during the season, I thought that maybe he was a little heavy, and this is just my opinion. And probably what does he do this summer? Kind of like you know, Al Jefferson, and he had basically admitted it at the end of the season. He's got to get in better condition. You know, Lance was a guy who went from basically a minimum contract to a $9 million contract. So, that shocks your system. I don't care who you are. And I think his role will be interesting going forward with the Clips because, Doc and CP and Blake, those guys are going to demand certain things from him that maybe he didn't, he didn't figure it out this year that way. So it'll be, I think he still has an upside. Obviously the kid, he was good enough to get the contract. Now he has to go out and earn it.
Before we let you get out of here, as you talk about that, I have one final question for you. A lot is made about the coach-player relationship. But how important is the general manager relationship, with the players and obviously with draft picks coming in? How important is it to establish that rapport? And can you kind of talk about too, kind of like the best relationship that you've had, with a player that maybe you drafted?
Well, I think you want, your head in the department, you want to have relationships with every individual. Whether that's the assistant strength coach or that's your $12 million player, and that's that just helps your communication, your ability to kind of feel what whomever is feeling with that staff. So I think it's vital anytime you draft a player, you trade for a player, you sign a player to have a relationship with the guy. It's a business first and foremost. We all know that. And it's a business that goes in terms of players really fast, having been a former player. So in that realization as a manager, as a coach, I think it's vital, to have those relationships, those contacts. And you can look at some of the model successes like the Spurs. And that's, Oklahoma City currently, they have good situations, good development programs for their system and their players and their staff.
Rod, we really appreciate you taking some time to jump on our show here, really kind of give us some true insight on what, and from a management perspective, what we're going to be looking to see happen in this upcoming draft. And, we really want to wish you the best in everything that you're doing. We certainly are going to be following your footsteps as you continue to make an imprint in the league. And once again, man, we just really thank you for jumping on our show and talking with us as we move forward.
All righty, guys. Thanks for having me on.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal